Great, thanks, Antonio. So yeah, we're MRAG, and we were responsible for leading the task, which was to develop a benchmark tool for product labelling. So to provide you with a little bit of background, global fish consumption is now increasing at a faster rate than population growth. And it is now thought that the average person consumes twice as much seafood as they did 50 years ago. And the reason for this increase is not only an increase in production, but also due to other factors such as technological developments, a reduction in waste, and also a sort of heightened awareness among consumers about the benefits that seafood can provide. But at the same time as this increase in consumption and production, as you've seen earlier today, there's also a continual decline of fish stocks. So it's now thought that approximately a third of all fish stocks are fished at biologically unsustainable levels. And this problem is compounded by the fact that there's still a significant amount of discarding occurring and also an underutilization of some species. And as you heard this morning, there's also a widespread mineral and vitamin deficiency occurring. So the challenge in meeting this demand is going to be to ensure that consumption and production is done in a way that's social, economically, and environmentally sustainable. So one of the solutions that's becoming increasingly popular is that of voluntary or private standards. And these are usually implemented by private entities, either commercial or non-commercial, and can cover a range of topics, so including sustainability, social, environmental issues, and increasingly more food quality and food safety. And these standards allow you to influence the market and also create incentives for sustainability. They also provide transparent assurances for consumers and help to mitigate and reduce risks along the supply chain. So considering the benefits of private standards and also as a way to consolidate some of the products that have been produced in Seafood Tomorrow, we've developed a benchmark tool. And this benchmark tool can be seen as the first step in developing a full certification standard. So the purpose of the tool is to allow companies to produce, market and supply some of the innovative products that have been developed by Seafood Tomorrow that you've heard about today, to ensure that products can continue to conform with the Seafood Tomorrow nutritional and safety claims. It will allow companies to consider environmental, social and sustainably responsible practices, and also hopefully to incentivize continual improvement. And finally, it will help consumers make responsible and informed choices. So the following are included in the benchmark tool, all of which you've heard about today. The first one is the production and use of fortified feed for the sea bream, carp and trout. And this includes the feed itself as well as the fortified fish. The 2 sodium reduced salmon products. The 6 nutritionally adapted seafood products for youth, pregnant women and seniors. The 3 strategies to decontaminate and improve the safety of seafood products, and the 2 strategies that looked at reducing energy and water consumption. So to provide you sort of a very brief overview of how the assessment process works, it begins by an entity expressing interest that they want to start producing one of the Seafood Tomorrow products. After this, they receive a pre-audit questionnaire, which acts as the first phase of the benchmark tool. This is also when the company or entity can determine which type of audit they'd like. So we've developed 3 different types. So the first one is the initial audit, and this is when the company first wants to start producing a product. The second is a surveillance audit, and this occurs every 12 months to ensure that the company is still conforming with protocols. And a reassessment. And a reassessment occurs if something's been identified which requires a corrective action, which I'll explain in a bit more detail. So if the company is eligible, the second phase of the audit can begin, and this usually consists of an on-site audit. And on the on-site audit, certain criteria is assessed against a 4-tiered scoring system. The first is an unconditional pass. The second is a pass with observation, which means that something's been recognised that deviates slightly from protocol, but doesn't affect the sort of overall integrity of the product. You then have potential for improvement, which means that a risk area has been identified, which could cause an issue in the future. And this should be rectified by the next audit or the sort of surveillance audit, which occurs in 12 months' time. And then finally, you have corrective action. And this means that something's been identified that deviates significantly from the protocol so that it no longer conforms with the Seafood Tomorrow specifications. And in this case, the company then has 6 months to implement a corrective action plan, after which a reassessment occurs and it's determined whether that entity is eligible to carry the Seafood Tomorrow label. So I'm now going to pass over to my colleague Tom, who's going to go into a bit more detail about the tool itself and the guidance document that we've created to go alongside it.
Hello, thank you, Hannah. So we're sort of sharing the presentation of this. So just Hannah's gone over the sort of broad strokes of the benchmark tool and how the general concept of it. So what I'm going to do now is just have a look in a bit more detail of the individual aspects and the technical details. So as Hannah has mentioned, there is what the main gist of what we've been developing, the main guts of what we've been developing is a benchmark tool. And to run alongside that, we have a guidance document which the auditor is able to refer to. Obviously, the objective of this is to ensure that we have consistent methodology, consistent interpretation of what may be considered a pass or a pass of observation or a corrective action required. So we have two main documents as shown there. We have the benchmark tool, which is like an Excel checklist. And then we have the tool guidance, which is, well, I guess, a PDF or something that can be printed out as well. Okay, so just to, now there's various sections. So if we look at the Excel document, there are various tabs within that. And they deal with separate phases. So phase 1 is the first one. We also have phase 2 and phase 3. We've discussed this sort of concept in previous meetings, but essentially phase 1 establishes the audit type, so what type of audit will be carried out, as Hannah mentioned, whether it will be a reassessment, whether it will be an initial audit, whether it will be assessing a surveillance audit. Then we also have a look at the audit eligibility and the audit scope. So you know, what are the companies involved? What is the product being produced? Where is it being produced? Are there subcontractors? And it just allows the auditor to develop a bit of a picture of the company, where they'll need to visit, who they'll need to talk to, who are the contact persons, so on and so forth. So looking at the, I mentioned audit eligibility before. So how we've developed this benchmark tool is that there's a series of various questions which, depending on the response, will activate or deactivate certain sections. We felt it was important to do this because initially when you open up the benchmark tool, there's a whole lot of tabs, and I think initially it can become a little bit confusing. So what we wanted to be able to do is be able to filter that down, because very different tasks have been developed within the program, and I think rather than being able to create a benchmark for everything fits all, we've had to sort of develop a set of bespoke criteria. You know, we cannot be looking, if we're looking at reduced salt and salmon, that does not compare with fortified fish feed, for example. So what we have is a series of activation, and what we just initially discussed was the audit eligibility. So initially, we ask a few questions. Has the company been prosecuted in the past for any social abuses, or has the company been prosecuted in the past for any environmental law abuses or anything like that? So I think this was quite important to address first up, so to not bother going any further, because we obviously, I think for the long-term credibility of this program, we have to be sure that they are able to demonstrate good practice across the board. We don't necessarily want to go into this detail in the audit, because I think, you know, if they're not able to clear this bar, then there's no point going forward. So it's just a set of very simple questions, and hopefully you can see that there, but we just say have they been prosecuted for any environmental law? And the answer there is yes, and so immediately pops up the company is ineligible, so terminate the audit. Now, the information for phase 1, most of that is going to be obtained from the pre-audit questionnaire, which is what Hannah discussed earlier, but there's obviously also going to be supplemented by some of the auditor's own research through the public domain. So again, if we have a look at the phase 1, helping to establish a scope, so we go through just a simple, quick checklist, really answering most cases yes or no. And as you can say there, what has the product been produced? So it's salmon pate. So as we go down, that has essentially saying no to some of the previous questions, has deactivated a whole lot of tabs, essentially hidden them from view. Saying yes has maintained the reduce salt tab there. So that means that it hopefully provides a nice, clear indication of where the auditor has to go next. And as the auditor goes through, now we've established which of phase 2 questions we need to be asking, these phase 2 questions are very much based on the tasks themselves. What were the processes involved in creating this end goal of the audit? So what we've done there, and as Hannah's talked about previously, there are 4 possible responses: pass with observation, potential for improvement, and corrective action required. So the auditor will go through and using the guidance document, what they will choose which of those responses best fit the question. So using the drop down, and then in the column alongside that, providing some sort of justification and evidence for making that decision. Now, as we've discussed before, we have the benchmark guidance, and this is important to ensure that it's consistent interpretation of the performance of the various companies. So hopefully this is what we call an evaluation matrix. As the auditor goes through each of the question, they can use this as a guidance and just passing from left to right, seeing if it satisfies the criteria for pass. If it does, there's no need for any more to be done. If it does not, then they keep on going to the right to establish if perhaps it's an observation or perhaps it's an improvement possible. I think it's also worth touching on the fact that rather than just have a simple pass or central fail, what we want to do is kind of create a situation which encouraged improvement, encouraged better compliance, rather than saying you've failed. So in lots of cases, I think there would be scope for improvement, but I think it's also important to be able to say at this stage, it's not really affecting the company's ability to meet the requirements of the task, but it may be that in the future, we can't be absolutely certain that will still be the case, or perhaps further improvement can be made. So that's what we've tried to do there, is create some sort of in-between which encourages increased improvement. Okay, so once we've finished phase 2, we have a look at phase 3. So phase 3 really deals with traceability. And listening to Jean-Jacques before, and he talked quite extensively about what's called external traceability. This isn't dealing with the internal traceability of a company. So what we have here is with the internal traceability. So from the point of receipt until the point of onward sale or dispatch. How is that product maintaining its integrity throughout its handling and its processing? So obviously, if we can't be certain that reduced salts salmon pate made with salt well has not been mixed with other products, we cannot be certain that we can no longer be able to say that that is a Seafood Tomorrow product. So it's very important to be able to provide those traceability assurances. This is why we've decided to create a very specific second phase for that. Again, that operates in a similar situation where we have followed an evaluation matrix within the guidance document and selecting one from pass with observation. Potential for improvement or corrective action required. And so we just have a bit of a demonstration with the traceability test. I won't go into too much detail with this. I think it's important that anyone that is doing this has to have had some audit experience, particularly with traceability and against other standards. And traceability, for anyone that has done any audits, will know that it's often very different between companies and often within companies, depending on the product. The important thing to note is that we need to be able to have a linking document. That's something that allows us to trace from the point of sale back to the point of receipt, or the point where that product becomes Seafood Tomorrow. And it's just a case of itemizing it, itemizing the type of document that traces that item through production and the linking references. Now, mass balance is also very important. That helps us demonstrate that, you know, we're not producing 200 grams of salmon pate from 50 grams of salmon raw material. We need to be able to make sure that there's no additional non-approved product being used, and that any losses or gains can be explained. So that's kind of a bit of a simplified flow chart of what happens. We have a raw material going through. Some of that raw material may be used for other products, in which case we account for that, and then we follow the product through to its endpoint, through its different stages, and having a look at the expected yield against the actual yield. And from that, we'll just have a bit of a final summary of that. That will be on another tab, and we'll be able to say, okay, that we're able to satisfy both mass balance and traceability. And these tabs essentially act as evidence within the traceability and mass balance questions relating to traceability. And of course, once that's all done, we get to a stage where we're able to say that, or recommend that this entity is able to use the Seafood Tomorrow label. It was mentioned before that obviously if companies want to take this forward, but I think it is important that they are able to satisfy the criteria that's involved, they're able to follow at least the tasks, and that they're willing to develop and improve alongside. I think, Hannah, you've also worked quite extensively with the label, so if I just hand you back.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Tom. These labels were designed with another partner on Seafood Tomorrow, AquaTT. And just here you've got some examples of the labels. On the right is a single claim, and on the left is a multi-claim. And these are available in English, but also in French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian. As Jean-Jacques mentioned, there's also a QR code included on the label, and when you scan this label, consumers can find out a bit more information about the product, how it was developed, and some of the benefits, just to improve some of the transparency towards consumers. So finally, in conclusion, the benchmark tool able to provide an overview of the products and solutions developed in the Seafood Tomorrow program. It allows companies to reproduce these innovative products and make certain nutritional safety claims. It allows companies to be rewarded with a private standard. It also provides assurances of social, environmental, and sustainably good practices, as well as helping consumers make informed choices. And I think that's it. Thank you.